Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haya. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the compass and hopefully the map on whatever's going to happen today. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and it would be really awesome if you did. That's how we grow and thrive. Over on our website at autistic.fm, you can find episode transcripts and additional information. We also have discussion threads for each individual episode, a neurospicy discussion forum, and much more. All of that is free. If you become a supporter for as little as $5 a month, you can get a sneak peek of the topics that we have coming up and even submit questions for our guests. You can also add themes to our future topics wish list, and you get access to a supporters-only discussion group. In this episode of the podcast, I am joined by Grant Harris, a passionate advocate for neurodiversity in the workplace. Diagnosed as autistic just a few years ago, Grant brings a wealth of experience from his career in entrepreneurship, government contracting, and education. He shares his personal journey of discovery and the profound effects his neurodivergent identity has had on his life and his career. His insights help illuminate the challenges and opportunities of integrating neurodiversity in professional spaces. Our conversation goes all over the place, and I absolutely love it. I do want to add a quick trigger warning. During our discussion, we touch on issues like prejudice and bias in corporate environments, and there's also some references to terms that we don't really use anymore. If that bothers you, please do look after yourself and listen accordingly. With all of that out of the way, let's roll tape. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. What is your name and what pronouns do you use?
Hiya. How are you today?
I see what you did there.
Yeah, you see what I did there. My name is Grant Harris, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And where in the world are you?
I am outside the D.C. area in Northern Virginia in a Shenandoah Valley called Winchester, Virginia. A little bit about me. Like I said, a Washingtonian by trade. I identify as a Black man in America. I happen to be in my early 40s. I actually have a birthday coming up next month, which I share with my youngest daughter. Our birthday is the same day.
It's amazing.
And I happen to be autistic. And I was diagnosed autistic about 3 years ago this spring. And ever since then, as part of the work that I do that we'll get into, I talk about and speak about and write about neurodiversity in the workplace from the boardroom to the mailroom is my message. The reason I talk about from the boardroom to the mailroom is because I happen to be an entrepreneur and a business owner. I've spent time in many different realms of work, management consulting, education, both K-12 and higher ed, government contracting, working with large and small federal agencies, and also entrepreneurship. I've been in all of those realms throughout my working career, and only recently found out that being autistic both helped and sometimes harmed my success in those particular realms. So the last 3 years, I have been diagnosed formally. My wife is ADHD, and my oldest daughter also has executive functioning challenges and also has battled depression. So neurodiversity is not new in my particular household, but I'm the only one in my nuclear family growing up of my parents and my two sisters that has been formally diagnosed with a disability. One of my sisters has acquired disability later on in life through an autoimmune disorder, but I'm the only one with a neurodivergence from an autism perspective. So that's a part of the work that I do, and conversations that I have in forums such as these is talking about how neurodiversity from a holistic and a general perspective shows up in the workplace, in different people, in different demographics, and how employees and employers can move from a position of compliance, which is a fixed mindset, to community, which is a growth mindset, but also more than a mindset, there are actions and behaviors in community as humans. And ultimately, I identify as being neurodistinct. I don't identify as neurodivergent, and we can get into the nitty gritty about the difference between the two in my mind. But the reason that I see it as that is because you, Haya, me, and all of your listeners, we are unique human beings first and foremost. before our characteristics, before what we look like, before our experiences, before our trauma, before whatever title and job and workplace that we're in. We're humans first, distinctly and uniquely. So I see myself as neurodistinct because while you have a brain and I have a brain, and I don't know your particular status and how you identify, but a neurotypical person, we both have brains and we're both humans and distinct in that way. But I think differently and I also behave differently than a neurotypical person might. So that's
Yeah.
why I identify as neurodistinct. And again, thank you for allowing me to give your audience a little bit of a context and a background.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny, the listeners don't know this, but we started a little bit late because my previous guest had a slow internet connection, and so we had to wait for the upload to finish. But Andy identifies specifically as neurodefiant. And I thought that was a really interesting framework. I like your neurodistinct. And I like that, all of those labels feel good to me. Like, we get to choose our own labels. Like, there's a world where we rely on the DSM to give us I have it in my hand now, and on the cover of it, it says it's a manual of mental disorders. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
Like, it isn't easy to be me, but it doesn't feel like a disorder, right? And so your neurodistinct qualifier really rings true for me. I think that's really wonderful. I'm curious. So clearly you went through a large slice of life without a formal diagnosis, at least. What was it that happened that made you first think, there is something that's different about me?
That's the story. It wasn't me at all. I wasn't sitting around thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Because everybody else is like this and I'm like this. I probably would not be diagnosed at this point in life if it had not been for my wife. And so my wife was the catalyst to that.
Right.
And for any of your listeners, if have ever been in a serious romantic relationship, or if you're married or ever have been married, you understand that communication is a pendulum and it swings, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not so great. Sometimes it's smooth, other times it's a struggle. So at this particular point in time in our marriage, my wife and I, communication was struggling. We just weren't connecting, we weren't getting each other. And not just like you're a little bit of a tiff or a little bit of a disagreement. Like, this was ongoing, just we're not fitting each other from a communication standpoint. So we were struggling. And she had thought earlier on in our relationship that I might be autistic. And she never really brought that to my attention. She brought it to my family's attention briefly. It was either, and I wasn't there, but it was described to me as not taken seriously, swept under the rug. So, but she was the catalyst, and she sent me an article, a listicle of 10 reasons that your romantic partner or your spouse might be autistic. So I read it, and at that time, I identified strongly with 8 things on that list. I said, yeah, that's kind of me. Yeah, I do that. Yeah, I react that way. And that was the catalyst. At that point in time, I had been teaching autistic kids at the middle school level, and I didn't know that I was autistic. I had been in some of the diversity work that I do, but I had not applied any of that to me as being neurodivergent in any way, shape, or form. I just hadn't thought about that. It was my wife that brought it to my attention and said, this might be the reason that we are just butting heads. And she's long time diagnosed ADHD. And I'm aware that there are co-occurring ADHDs out there, people who have both and live through that. I do not believe that's me. She's very distinctly ADHD. I'm very distinctly autistic, no pun intended with the distinct, but that was the catalyst. And I was very fortunate to have friends who were psychologists that referred me to people that they trusted. I still had to pay for my diagnosis. It wasn't free. And I get on a soapbox when it comes to access to diagnosis. And let me take a step back with diagnosis. I am a firm believer that you do not have to be formally diagnosed to identify as neurodistinct, or however you choose your label. I think it helps in the workplace. It helps in a workplace to establish that credibility for accommodations and adjustments. I think it helps to see things on paper, for humans to be like, I could see this and I can apply it there. But it is what it is. It's paper, but it gives credibility in the workplace. And a lot of workplaces still unfortunately, require documentation, or they require disclosure in all the ways that they shouldn't or couldn't. But it was helpful for me to have that diagnosis so that I could use it in the workplace, that I could have a foundation to say this is what it is. And from that foundation, be able to evolve into what I am now. And I'm still on a personal journey. It was recently, about a year ago, that I first posted on LinkedIn about being autistic to the world. And I wrote about that recently. So I'm still on my personal journey, but I'm many steps ahead of where I was before.
Do you feel like, as you started telling people that you were autistic and identified as autistic, what were the responses? Were people surprised, or they were like, yeah, no, that totally makes sense?
From a family perspective, the people that were closest to me, they were in a level of disbelief or confusion. It wasn't readily accepted with open arms. And that's for a lot of reasons that I don't blame my family for in any way, shape, or form. African Americans or Black people have a rife history with the medical profession, especially Black women. So we're skeptical of doctors in many ways from a historical perspective. And they felt that since I was diagnosed by a white woman doctor, that they were just putting a label on me, as history has shown for the medical profession to do to Black people throughout history. So it wasn't straight out denial, but it certainly wasn't acceptance. And I think that's also because I was late diagnosed, and they had gone almost 40 years of of me, and this is who I am, and this is how I operate, and had never aligned that or prescribed that to any type of neurodivergence. So I think it was more of you've been this way for this long, this is just how it is, we're not sure if it's autism or not thing.
And I think that makes a lot of sense for late diagnosed folks, right? Not least because you made it this far. So, you're per definition not very high support needs. And you end up in this weird situation where, like, well, you made it this far. Like, why do you need a diagnosis now? Was that something you heard?
So, yes. And I am low support needs in many ways from an autistic perspective, because I don't elope from my home. I don't STEM in the way that many of the students that I used to teach STEM. I'm verbal, clearly. So just to look at me and to be around me, you would say, oh, you're not autistic. But if you know me and my patterns and my routines and my line of communication
and your internal experience,
all of that, yes, if you know all of that on a deeper level, then you can align those things. So yeah, I'm low support needs in many ways, but in other ways, I'm very high support needs. Like, I need high support when it comes to understanding indirect communication. I need high support when it comes to knowing when and how the level of empathy that I should be applying in a certain situation. I need high support when it comes to breaking my routine or doing things that are out of the ordinary and the norm for me. So all of us are low and high support needs. And I certainly understand where you're coming from for that conversation. But there was no question of why now? Why are you getting a diagnosis now? That was not brought up. I have never been a person or a man that is afraid of medicine or afraid of learning more about myself. I'm a psychology major and a philosophy minor. I'm a reader, writer, thinker. I think about my thinking. So I'm always that's part of my autistic nature, is that I'm an absorber. I absorb vast amounts of information. So I'm always learning about the world around me, but I had to be learning about the world inside of me for the last 3 years in a different way than most other people do.
That's a really beautiful distinction. I appreciate you naming that. And I want to make clear that I like everything you just said. I 100% feel and have experienced, and I think it's such a strange universe to be in, for me anyway, to be in a place where everybody around me thinks I'm doing well, but I know what I'm experiencing, and it doesn't feel good, right?
Yes.
I'm like, my lived experience is different from what other people perceive, and the challenge with autism often is that like you are being diagnosed or perceived externally, and that's how the autism shows up rather than what your lived experience is. Or at least that was my experience. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, my family and I attended military college. So my college experience is much different than a standard traditional 4-year experience that you might get at a party school or a sports school, etc.
Yeah.
And a lot of what my family and friends attributed to me as my characteristic traits stem from my college experience, which was very rigid, very structured, low emotional support, high intellectual demand, high focus on outcome, get the job done, etc. And I believe at this stage of the game, and I've been out of college many years now, but I believe that environment, part of the reason that I flourished in that environment is because my autistic traits were able to flourish at that time, which people around me saw as a big change somehow, some way than my life before that. Yeah, going to a military school is going to change you. Going to college changes anybody. So there was like a little switch there. But again, these things I didn't know at the time. I wasn't consciously aware of them. But looking back now, I think that's why I embraced that culture so much at the time, is because those traits were able to flourish.
I've had a number of guests on the podcast who have been to various types of military school or military experience of some sort. And I think you just said something really important, which like the rigidity, like you do, like it's almost a cliche how little control you have over your life when you're in a military. But if rigidity and clear expectations work for you, which of course for many autistic people that is true, that is kind of a beautiful place to be. Like was that your experience? Where like, oh, I feel at home here because I don't like.
Oh, it's a great place. We have a saying, we have lots of sayings, and I'm a proud alum. I sit on the board of directors for the Alumni Association. So we say that it's a great place to be from, not so great to be at. Because when you're there, it's a struggle and nobody likes it when it's there. But when you leave that environment and you see what it does for you as a person, then you love that environment where you come from. I always thought that I would have, and I did not take a commission. If I had taken a commission out of college, I would have been an officer at that point, and I could have done that. I chose not to. But to this day, I believe that I would have been an excellent military officer based on my foundational and characteristics and traits of, like you said, rigidity, structure, yes, no, black, white. I'm much more gray now. I'm married. I have 3 kids. I've learned about the gray. But for most of my life, it was very left, yes, no, black or white. And that's what you get in most of the military. So I still think that I would have been successful. My life would have been completely different than it is now. That experience was transformative.
And so I'm curious about what you are doing now. It feels like you have a really strong drive towards building bridges.
Yes, the work that I do now, I described a bit of this earlier on, is I am a consultant. I own my own consultancy. I work with public and private organizations who are looking to do many things, but I help them to integrate and implement and improve their diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, DEIA, policies, practices, and procedures. So I consult, I speak, I write. I'm a 3-time published author, and I build community within organizations. I help organizations achieve excellence and help them become more effective and efficient by focusing on lots of things, but specifically 3 T's: time, talent, and treasure. The time that they are using, the talent that they have, the people, and the treasure that they have, the funds. And now, since I have been diagnosed and I have a focus on neurodiversity, I encourage and promote neurodiversity, like I mentioned, from the boardroom to the mailroom. I say that because neurodiversity shows up in every aspect of the workplace. You can be the CEO or you can be the intern, and neurodiversity impacts you. You may be quote unquote neuro, which there really isn't a neurotypical, because even brains who aren't described medically as neurodivergent still operate differently. They just have a similar wiring, which is why they're labeled as typical. But that aside, it touches families, it touches coworkers, it touches departments, it touches small business owners, it touches the Fortune 100, it touches the mail person that delivers your mail, and every aspect of life. And then in the workplace, it's all around us because we are all neurodiverse, because we're all different people with different traits and characteristics. So when I talk about it in the workplace, it's from a human capital impact perspective and a financial impact perspective. How are the people being affected? And how is the bottom line being affected? Because most businesses are in business to make money in some way, shape, or form, either internally or externally. And then it goes back to those principles of time, talent, and treasure, and also being efficient and equitable with your practices, whether that be hiring, firing, leadership development, organizational development. How is the organization moving and changing over time? So this is the work that I do. It's very strategic because, again, my autistic traits, I'm a strategic thinker. I'm always thinking chess, not checkers. How do we move this group of people from where they are now to where they need to be? And how do we do that with the least amount of stress, the most amount of equity to the outcome that the organization and all the people in it are better at the end of the day? So that's the work that I do now.
Grant, I am noticing I am kind of on the verge of tears over here. And I think the reason for that is that I have been in a number of jobs in multi-thousand, like I've been a TV producer, I've been an editor in various magazines and stuff in large organizations. And I've always felt incredibly out of place. Like I was missing something, like something was harder for me than it was for other people. And knowing that you're out there doing this work really touches me. Thank you for doing it.
Oh, thank you for the compliments. That's high praise. And part of that work is having these types of conversations. I tell my story so people that can understand or they can relate. And my story is no better than anyone else's, but it is mine. And then I try to apply those principles of community, of growth mindset, of practicing inclusive behavior through everything that I do, through my conversation, through the approach that I take to other people, through the lens that I see myself and the lens that I hope that the world sees me through. So I appreciate that. That's high praise. Thank you for the compliment.
Yeah. I think when I left my last real job, it's been many years at this point. I worked at a venture firm for a VC capital firm for a hot minute as a director of portfolio. And in a weird kind of way, that doesn't feel like a real job. Not because the work wasn't real, but because it was such a strange place to work and I was surrounded by other neurospicy folks. So it was kind of that was a blessing. It was it was relatively easy to work there compared to any other workplace I've been in. Mm-hmm. And the only way I've been able to get to do work that actually worked for my brain was to start my own companies. I've done a bunch of startups. I've written a bunch of books. I've done I've worked as a freelance journalist, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if you work for yourself or if you start your own thing, you kind of have the agency and power to design an org structure that works for you. And that's what I've done many times over. What I'm curious about is when you go into a large company, I think you mentioned Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000, what do you perceive as some of the biggest challenges around neurodivergence in those types of organizations? What is the what is the thin end of the wedge or the place where you see the most friction in those organizations when it comes to working with people like me, basically?
Yeah, we all have prejudice and bias. It exists, and it's not whether or not it exists in an organization. Prejudice and bias
Right.
exist in people, it exists in an organization. It's whether, one, if you're aware of it, and being aware is only part of the solution. If you're aware of something, then you have to do something about of the biases that stem from the senior leaders and the middle managers that I work with is the social norm bias, assumption bias. They make assumptions about what neurodiversity is or isn't. And specifically, one of those assumptions is that neurodiversity is relegated to autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, because those are
Right.
the most popular, most talked about, most heard about types of neurodivergence. When the truth
Yep.
is, there are dozens and dozens of types of neurodivergence outside of those three. So assumption bias, social norm bias, this is the way that we've done this. We've done this for 100 years. We've done this for 10 years.
Right.
We've done it this way. So the bias of this is the norm. And then why should we do it a different way? Why should we look at it a different way? Why should we take a risk? These types of social norm biases. And then you get into, that's from a holistic perspective. And then you get into the interpersonal eye contact bias, people looking at you or not looking at you, the communication biases based on how people communicate or don't. All of these interpersonal, when you look at time bias, the fact that some people need more time to do a different type of work than other people. And then you get into the prejudice of these people are getting special treatment because of the adjustments or the accommodations. It's not special treatment because, number one, it's guaranteed by law. It's guaranteed in the Americans with Disabilities Act that that people with disabilities have a right to request reasonable accommodations. So it's not about it being special treatment. It's lawful. And beneath that, before you even get into accommodations, adjustments can be made which don't require any type of formal or lawful policy or procedure from that perspective. So these are the types of biases or prejudices that exist in organizations from an organizational perspective, just from a cultural, it's in the ether perspective, and then from an interpersonal, from person to person perspective as well.
That sounds like a lot to bite into.
It is, which is why I don't take it all on at once, because this work is not something that is changed overnight, and that's part of the conversations that I have, and the reason that I try to establish long-term relationships with clients, because these things didn't happen overnight. They're not going to shift overnight. Some things can shift very quickly. Other things take more time, but it is a lot. And I'm giving you more, but that's why when I come into an organization, we take a snapshot, take an assessment of where that organization is, which is part of my proprietary framework that I created called RACE, RACE. So that's an acronym for recognize, acknowledge, cultivate, and engage. So it's a cyclical framework, and we always are looking at our work through these 4 different types of steps. And the first step is to recognize who and where you are on your journey. That can apply to the organization as a whole. That can also apply to an individual within the organization. Who are you? Your core values, your principles. Where are you on your journey? Where is this organization compared to where it was 5 years ago? When it comes to its practices, where are these people in the organization compared to 5 years ago? So I always start with that recognition, and I move into acknowledgement, which is about acknowledging intent versus impact. What does the business intend to do? But what did it actually do? What do these policies and procedures intend to do? But what do they actually do? Intent versus impact. And then the C is to cultivate education, cultivate learning, cultivating your culture to say, okay, we may be great at this, but we're not so great at this. How do we get better as a whole? How do we get 1% better? And that's how I manage personally. Like you said, that's a lot. I'm always looking at just get 1% better every day. What can I do today? One thing that I can do today better than I did yesterday. And I also apply that to an organization. What is one policy, practice, or procedure that can be better today than it was yesterday? And when you roll those up, then you get incremental progress. And last but not least is the E, which is engage. Engage is do the work. You can talk about it. You can be introspective. You can reflect on it, which is doing a part of the work. And you can read about things and you can go to webinars, again, which is part of doing work. But you have to apply those principles and the things that you reflected on, the things that you learned in the webinar, the things that you took out of the training. And you have to go out into the workplace and you have to enact them. And you have to try them. And then you have to fail at them. And then you have to do it again and do it better.
Yeah.
The last E is engage. And again, as you might imagine, as I said, this is a cyclical process. You don't just go through one step at a time. And then at the end, you say, oh, I'm at the end. I'm all
We're
good.
all done now. Yeah.
No. So as soon as you're engaging, then you're recognizing, where am I now? Who am I now? And then you're acknowledging, and then you're cultivating. And then it's all the cycle that continues to go. And once you are doing all of these things at the same time, that's when you are achieving a different level of excellence. And that's the work that I attain to do.
Yeah. Are you seeing pull for your work? Like, are people excited to do this? I feel like the narrative has shifted around DEI quite significantly over the last few months.
Oh, it has. And earlier today, I was on a monthly call about the fight for DEI and how do we sustain it. I don't fight for DEI because DEI is a term and it's not a thing that you put on the shelf and you say, this is mine and I'm going to protect it. That's not how it works. It's a practice. It's a mindset. It's a belief and set of behaviors. It's something that is ingrained in a person and or people. So thereby, it cannot be removed from an organization. Just because an organization decides not to do this survey or decides not to enact this policy, which I might disagree with in theory, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden DEI is removed from the organization. I am a practitioner, and DEI is not the enemy. People have packaged those three very different terms up into one package and said, we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because we don't like this package. Guess what? People who are neurodistinct and neurodivergent still exist in your organization. Guess what? People who are LGBTQIA+ still exist in your organization. Guess what? You still have different religions. You still have different nationalities. You still have different cultures. All of that still exists, even if you decide to get rid of a specific policy. Because no organization is a monolith. No business is a monolith. We are all wrapped up in DEI, whether you like it or not, because that's just how the human experience and the human existence, that's what it is. So yes, the backlash is against a policy or an ideology. That's the backlash. But the work and the people that exist within the organizations haven't gone anywhere. And when you look at the hard data, and any practitioner worth their salt will tell you that the majority of American businesses, upwards of 80%, anywhere between 70 and 80%, are either doubling down on their DEI related efforts, and or they are not dissuaded from pursuing them in the future. So they're either doubling down and doing the work deeper, or they're maintaining, that's the better word to use, they're maintaining their course. They just might speak about it differently. They might change terminology, but the work itself of understanding, of empathy, of awareness, of race, recognizing and acknowledging and cultivating and engaging, that work is still being done throughout American corporations, whatever social media is telling you and whatever
Yep.
headline media is telling you, that work is still being done.
I appreciate that distinction, and I think it's a really helpful way of adding a little bit of nuance to a conversation that needs nuance, and it seems to have kind of gone out the window a little bit. And of course, that's how political movements or political power is often used. But I think the really important thing you just mentioned is like, look, you can stop calling it DEI, but I'm still going to be autistic in the corner over here going, how the hell am I going to use this printer because it's too loud or whatever my challenge is?
Yes.
Yep.
So those challenges still are there. The business and the work might be put on hold. It might be put on pause. But as practitioners and anyone who knows me, I always say it's our duty to be flexible and agile and bendable, but not breakable. I have to be those things to get the work done: agile, flexible, bendable, but not breakable.
Absolutely. I am curious, since this podcast is largely about autism, what are some frequent recommendations that you make to businesses in order to make the workplace more accessible to neurodivergent folks or neurodistinct folks?
First and foremost, I say ask and listen. 30 to 40% of the current American workforce, and this is US-based statistics, identifies as being neurodivergent. But 70% of that percentage does not want to disclose because fear of retribution or retaliation. Asking and listening, asking what your employees need. How is it that they feel that they get their work done best? What does success look like to them? How can, as a middle manager or as a senior leader, how can I provide the best tools and resources for you to get your job done? And then shut up and listen. So ask those questions in conversation and then listen to the people that are doing that work, and they will tell you how they're going to be most successful. So that's always first and foremost in my mind, is to ask and listen. Yeah. Secondly, using neuroinclusive language, the way people speak in and around the office is important. Apparently, there's a resurgence in the R word. Retarded apparently is coming back in vogue, and I don't know why, other than the fact that English language evolves. All language evolves, and things go out of vogue and they come back in vogue. But obviously, that is not an inclusive term to use in a workplace. It's extremely outdated. However, people still say handicap, people still say special needs. So these kind of words and phrases that have been etched on the tablet of the American tongue is another place to start using more inclusive language and being aware of what you say to whom you say it to. So that's the language part. Yeah. Number two. Number three would be the behaviors. And the behaviors are allyship, stepping in when necessary and how necessary, given the opportunity to support disabled and neurodivergent people in the workforce, not to patronize them, not to make them feel that you are their great rescuer. That is not allyship in any way, shape, or form. Disabled people, autistic people, other neurodivergent people do not need rescuing because look at us. We are doing what we do just fine. But we do need allyship, but we only need allyship in situations where we request it or that we show that we are open to it. So being an ally, which is a completely different conversation for a different day in terms of behavior, CEOs can be allies, interns can be allies, middle managers can and should be allies. So when we have allies in the workplace and we practice allyship and we practice moving from compliance to community, that's how organizations get better. So those are three ways and three things that I suggest in terms of organizations and the people in them do and practice to make life better for people with disabilities in general and specifically neurodivergent folks as well.
I have a potentially really stupid question, but I have no shame, so I'm going to ask. For the longest part of my life, and most of the time when I was in corporate world, I was struggling a lot, but I wasn't aware that I was neurodivergent. And so I hear you when you say ask and listen, right? But I truly think if my boss had come up to me, like this was in the UK, there was no way this is going to happen, super honest. But if my boss had come up to me, it's like, hey, how can we make your life easier? How can we make this job better, easier for you? I have no idea what I would have answered in that moment. And I suspect, as you're naming that a large proportion of the neurodivergent population is, for lack of a better word, in the closet or not disclosed, and like many may not even know, they just know they're struggling. Like as a manager, is there anything you can do to proactively open the door or open a conversation? Or I don't even really know what my question is here, but I'm realizing I wish something had happened for me when I was in that position. But I wouldn't have known what to ask for, and I wouldn't have known what would have been helpful for them to offer. So maybe this is a very silly question, but if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
It's not a silly question at all, and that's okay to not know, because the first time a manager asks an employee, how can the situation be better? What do you need? And you may not know in that moment, but what you do know, what that employee does know, is that their manager cares about them. Their manager is invested, that leader is invested in that employee. That you do know, because they're asking. So you may not know exactly at that point, I need this pencil sharpener, and I need this type of software, and you may not know those things, which is okay because you can learn those things over time. But what you do know immediately, whether or not it's your first day on the job or your 10th year on the job, if your leader is asking you about you and what you need and how you need it, immediately in that moment that they care about you. And that is the first step to building community. And that's the first step to building an organizational culture that cares about each other. So then therefore you can get to the point of the hard, I need this software. I need this pencil. That's the easy part. The hard part is showing that people care about each other. No, you may not have known what you needed at that point, but you would have known that your leader at that point cared about you and was invested in your success. What that success looks like now becomes a conversation between the two of you, which is what it should be. It shouldn't be manager has piece of paper and manager gives piece of paper to employee and says, this is your job. And at the end of this timeline, you're going to get a rating scale 1 to 5, and that's how you be successful. That's what it shouldn't be. It is for a lot of people, but that's what it shouldn't be. What it should be is, hey, this is what we have. This is what I had in mind. What do you see? How do we get to a place where we can maybe meet this 5? But if 5 is not the goal for you, maybe we meet a 4. How do we work on that? That's the conversation that needs to happen, instead of having the compliance mindset of this is what it is. This is what I told. This is what I was told it should be. This is what I'm going to tell you that it should be, and that's it. And you either get on board or you don't. That's the compliance mindset. But building community is an active behavior over time, because like you said, the first time you probably won't know. But if that manager comes back on a regular basis, that second, third, fourth time, you're going to know. You're going to be like, oh yeah, like I've been here for a few weeks, and if I had this, it would make my job a whole lot easier. But the only way that you as the employee is going to have confidence to request that is if you know upfront from the first time that the manager asked you that they're invested in you as the employee. That's the only way that you're going to feel comfortable enough to answer that question in the future. So not a silly question at all. It takes leadership, and it takes culture building, and it takes a level of interest and investment and empathy for leaders to just ask the question, how do you want to succeed and how can I help? And then keep asking that question. That's what I advise.
Yeah. Your answer just lit up two things in me that I think are really interesting, and I want to just kind of reflect back to you. One is I've had a number of managers over the years who were like, my door is always open. And then it wasn't, but my door is always open puts the onus on me to walk through that door and go, hey, something's up. And without a social script, as an autistic person, that is like, I am not going to walk into my boss's office and plop myself down and go, what's up? Right? That doesn't exist as a possibility in my world. So that already didn't work for me. But more importantly, like, I think if any manager had ever sat me down and gone like, hey, is there anything you're struggling with? Is there anything that you feel is particularly hard for you in this job? That as a conversation would have been incredibly powerful. And I still don't know if I would have been able to come up with the right pencil sharpener or the right whatever. But even just being asked, I just, like, as you were saying that, I had this visceral reaction of grief. Whereas, like, the vast majority of managers I've had have not had that level of curiosity. And that's, I think that's what you're talking about, right? Is that, am I hearing that right?
Yes. And curiosity is a good C word. I talk about compliance and community curiosity is a good one too.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, managers don't have to become therapists. Managers don't have to become psychologists. They don't have to become.
Preferred if that didn't.
Yeah. It's just because at the end of the day, if as a senior leader or a manager, if your employees have what they need to do their job better, then your job as a leader is going to be easier. Like, that's math, and I'm not even good at math. So if my employees have everything they need and they're empowered to be successful in their role, then my job as a manager is going to be easier. So make everybody's life easier. And from the start, be the one that, how can I make your, even if you look at it from a selfish perspective, internally, don't say it out loud. But if you're a leader, you can look at it selfishly and be like, if Hyatt has everything he needs, that's going to be less work for me because I'm not going to have to manage him as much. I'm not going to have to micromanage him as much. I'm not going to have to check in on him as much. I'm not going to have to handhold him as much if up front he has what he needs in order to get the job done.
The phrase that springs to mind for me is thriving versus surviving. Like, if my team is thriving, this is great. If they're like hanging in there by the skin of their teeth, like if I gave zero shits about anything but the bottom line, that is not good for my bottom line. Like, even bringing it down to brass tacks that way, that's no way to run an organization.
No, and you will run that organization. You'll run that organization into the ground and into the red. And then you end up with burnt out managers because they're over managing. You're over managing because you're under leading. You're over managing because you're under leading. If you ask questions and put it out there and let people come back to you with what they need, then you're over leading and then you'll end up under managing. And that's what people want, because as you may know, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, they leave bosses. So these are the kind of things that come out in the RACE framework through assessment, through conversation, through focus group, through analysis, et cetera, all of the tools. But that's what comes out. And people say, I haven't heard anything from my boss in 3 weeks. I haven't, every conversation I have with my boss is about the bottom line. What's my output? The last time that I heard anything from a senior leader in terms of an update on software or hardware based on the requests that we put in was like last quarter, like these kind of things. So if you're not empowering your employees to do their best work, then you end up with a bunch of middle managers who are overworked, who are underled, overmanaged, and then it runs the organization into the ground. And that specifically relates to people who are neurodivergent because of some of the things that you mentioned. We're not going to cross that threshold of walking into a quote unquote open physical door. The open door policy that I'm talking about is an open emotional and open psychological door. So those conversations should be happening in the realm where the employee is most comfortable, not the realm where the supervisor is most comfortable. And over time, that's how culture is built, and that's how community within that culture is built.
I love that. Hey, Grant, I promised I would keep this to an hour, and we're coming up to an hour. There's a couple of questions I love to end these interviews with. And the first one is, and I guess I'll customize it slightly for you because I'm really excited about this now. What do you wish managers knew about neurodistinct employees?
I wish managers knew about neurodistinct employees that managers are neurodistinct. If you're a manager, you're part of that crowd. You might be neurodistinct yourself. You might need the same things that your employees are begging for. It's not a us versus them. It's not, oh, those people over there. It's a you. You are neurodistinct from the aspect of the fact that you have a brain and you're a person and you're a human. And you may not be neurodivergent from a medical perspective of having autism or ADHD or dyslexia, but most likely, given the stats on autism and ADHD and dyslexia, etc., you know someone who does, a son, daughter, cousin, friend, neighbor, and in the workplace, an employee, a coworker. So it's not those people over there. It's you in your seat from where you are, because managers are neurodistinct as well, a large portion of them. So that's one. And two, that how goes your relationship with your employees is how goes your relationship with the organization. If your relationship with your employees is effective and efficient and equitable, your relationship with the organization most likely is going to be effective, efficient, and equitable. They go hand in hand. It's difficult to have them disjointed. So the goal should be to be effective and efficient in the ways that I've discussed and that we've discussed, and equitable with your team. If you're a manager, a middle manager, and you're a supervisor, and making sure that your department operates as such, because then you are building your own community. You'll start to see improvement in obviously productivity and innovation and teamwork and all of that within your department, because you are doing the things that you should be doing. So those two things I would leave as, if you're a supervisor listening to this or a middle manager listening to this, that first and foremost, you might be in the same boat that your employees are as in terms of being neurodistinct. And two, if you are doing the 3 E's, being effective, efficient, and equitable within your department, within the realm of your control, then you are building the community within the culture that you should be.
I love the clarity of that. Thank you, Grant. And for my final question, can you tell me of a time that you felt seen and loved in exactly the right way for you specifically?
I have never been asked that. A time when I have been seen and loved in the way that I needed specifically.
Yeah.
In the short time that we have, Haya, I'm not sure that I could give you a concrete example. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened. I am saying that I have not been asked that question before. And as an autistic person, in the way that I operate, I usually take a little processing time and think about things like that, because that's a serious question. That's not a lighthearted.
It's a very serious question.
It's not a lighthearted question. So I'm gonna answer that and say that I have been seen and loved in the way that I need. That has changed over time, especially since my diagnosis. Obviously, my wife and my kids see me for who I am, and they love me for who I am, not because they have to, but because they want to. And especially since my diagnosis, my wife has done an excellent job of adjusting and transitioning and accommodating who she knows me to be now. So I would say over time, though, that cumulative, can't think of one instance in the moment, but that cumulative process certainly has been there since my diagnosis.
I love that for you. That's actually when I even asked the question, I had like, oh, you already told me about how your wife came to you and said, hey, you might be neurodivergent. And that is an act of love, right? It's an act of incredible, deep vulnerability.
Yeah, it was difficult to see that in the moment because we were just banging heads. But
Of
yes,
course. Yeah.
coming out and looking at it from a 30,000-foot level, 100% act of love. And like I said, since then, it's been acts of love up and down. So,
Yeah, I love that. My friend, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been an absolutely delightful episode, and I cannot wait to share it with my listeners. Thank you so much for your time.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the podcast. We hope you enjoyed exploring the intricacies of neurodiversity in the workplace with Grant Harris. You can find us on TikTok at Autistic FM. You can follow us on Instagram at autistic_FM, and you can visit our website on autistic.fm. On the website, you can subscribe for free and join in the discussion about each episode and suggest future guests. Becoming a supporter for as little as $5 a month allows you to contribute your ideas for podcast topics, and you get to submit questions for our exciting lineup of guests. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haya Camps. And from now on, I'm going to end these episodes with a weird fact that I love. Did you know that the Anglo-Zanzibar War, fought on the 27th of August in 1896 between the United Kingdom and the Sultanate of Zanzibar, holds the distinction of being the shortest recorded war in history? The whole war lasted between 38 and 45 minutes. Basically what happens was that the new Sultan took the throne without the approval of British authorities. The British Navy got involved, they brought a whole bunch of guns, and colonialism absolutely sucks. But a 45-minute war, I think it's an interesting factoid, and whenever I run pub quizzes, I love to sneak that one in. See you guys very soon.